First Baptist Church, Hazel's Wednesday night Bible study. Sure glad to have you tonight. Y'all been getting all these rain notices that we've been getting? We changed our ball game yesterday because it was going to rain, but it didn't rain. That's why we didn't win. Anyway, I can blame it on God if I want to. Let's stand and we'll do some praise songs. Please. Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns all music but its own. Awake my soul and sing of him who died for thee, and hail the matchless, matchless King throughout eternity. Crown him the Lord of life, who triumphed o'er the grave, and rose victorious in the strife for those he came to save. His glories now we see, who died and rose on high, who died eternal life to bring, and lives that death may die. Crown him the Lord of love, behold his hands and side, those wounds yet visible above in beauty glorified. All hail, Redeemer, hail, for thou hast died for me. Thy praise and glory shall not fail throughout eternity. Amen. Y'all sound pretty good. So Chris had to go to the doctor the other day, and he's sitting there, on his computer, doing his 9 million things they do on the computer. And he says, our business has really fallen off. We don't have near as many people as we used to have. I don't really understand it. And I'm thinking, well, if you didn't hum nearer my God to thee while you're filling out the prescriptions, they probably wouldn't be afraid to come back. That's just my feeling. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snare, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but thee, dear Lord, none but thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. sing very good, so I'm ready if you're ready. Just a closer walk with thee, just a closer walk. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Amen. Have a seat.
Amen. Thank you, Ann. Open your Bibles tonight to 1 Kings chapter 9. We're going to look at chapter 9 and 10 tonight. Both good chapters. 1 Kings chapter 9 and 10. Of course, remember we have been going through the Old Testament, and now we've been in 1 Kings for some weeks. And we've looked at Solomon having completed the temple, now having completed his palaces, and has secured his kingdom. And we're going to see tonight a response from God to him, a reminder from God, and then some interesting things details about his palace in chapter 10. Chapter 9, verse 1. When Solomon had finished building the temple of the Lord and the royal palace and had achieved all he had desired to do, the Lord appeared to him a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, I have heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple, which you have built, by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, if, and there's the condition, if you walk before me in integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them, and I will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. And though this temple is now imposing, all who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple? People will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. Unfortunately, the kingdom of Judah did turn to idols. They did disobey the Lord, and they did invite his punishment. The Babylonian army devastated the land in 587 BC. They destroyed Jerusalem and robbed and burned the temple Solomon has just dedicated. Instead of being a blessing to all the nations of the earth, the ruined city and temple would shock visitors from other nations and move them to ridicule. It is amazing how high God brought Israel in the time of Solomon. I mean, they were on the world stage. People from all over the world, and we're going to see tonight, came to Solomon because of his splendor and his wisdom. And it went all the way from that pentacle and the magnificent palace and the temple. It was so beautiful. And again, we'll see this later in chapter 10. It was so beautiful, it shocked even kings and princesses from other lands. It was a shocking, stunning, majestic structure, to the lowest of the low of just seeing a pile of rubble and becoming the ridicule of everybody who passed by. Before we pass judgment on David's royal line, we should consider how many churches, schools, denominations, and other Christian ministries have abandoned the true faith and ceased to bring glory to God. We hold some sort of I think, a delusional belief that here in the United States that we are somehow like Israel, that we are somehow God's chosen people. Even though God never said that, he never said the United States are my chosen people and I will establish their throne forever. I think we feel that way. We have it on our money, and I think one nation under God, as long as we have that on our money, we're good to go. Just like the Israelites thought, as long as they had the temple, they were good to go. I read on Fox News last week that a Catholic, and this is a quote from the article, a Catholic university in Northern Virginia is getting ready to cut 10 traditional majors and programs, including theology, religious studies, and economics, over a lack of potential for growth. That is, a Christian school is cutting their Christian programs and classes because people weren't interested. The school's president is backing the controversial plan, which would, by the way, does not only eliminate Christian programs, but just shocking what other programs they cut. He says, which would eliminate bachelor's degrees in theology and religious studies, philosophy, mathematics, art, history, sociology, English, economics, and secondary education. Those are the programs they're cutting. Marymount University, their plan has sent shockwaves throughout the campus community, drawing widespread condemnation from students and alumni. So it is amazing. And they're not the only one. There are, you would also be shocked, because I'm getting older, but you would be shocked at the kind of classes and programs they have been adding in the last decade to universities across the United States. Gender studies and all these kinds of things you wouldn't think would be a major. I don't know how they're going to get a career from any of this, but they are replacing bread and butter programs, and even Christian universities are replacing all of their theology programs and religious study programs with all of this woke junk that's out there. From Solomon's death in 931 until the reign of Zedekiah in 597 to 586, the Davidic dynasty would continue for God because he would keep his promise to David. But the only Jew alive today who qualifies to sit on David's throne and can prove it from genealogies is Jesus of Nazareth, the son of David, the Son of God. Unfortunately, he's the only one that remained true. They were faithless, and we'll get to that in the weeks and months to come as we continue to go through these books. Verse 10. At the end of 20 years, during which Solomon built these two buildings, that is the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, King Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with all the cedar and pine and gold he wanted. Remember this guy? This guy was really key in providing the wood necessary for the temple. And so he rewarded him by giving him, 10 towns? 20 towns in Galilee. Verse 12, but when Hiram went from Tyre to see the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them. What kind of towns are these you've given me, my brother? He asked, and he called them the land of Kabul, a name that they have to this day. Now Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Here's the account of the forced labor King Solomon constructed to build the Lord's temple, his own palace, the supporting terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had attacked and captured Gezer. He had set it on fire. He killed its Canaanite inhabitants and then gave it as a wedding gift to his daughter, Solomon's wife. And Solomon rebuilt Gezer. He built up Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, and Tadmor in the desert within his land, as well as all of his store cities and the towns for his chariots and for his horses. And we're going to see this in the next chapter. Whatever he desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and throughout all of the territory he ruled. So apart from the fact that Solomon shouldn't have been so extravagant in building his palace, He didn't have the right to give 20 cities away just to pay his debts. All the land belonged to the Lord and could not be deeded away permanently. That's a law from Leviticus chapter 25. Where on earth Solomon gotten his idea that he could give away the promised land is a mystery. One purpose for the year of Jubilee was to make sure the land that had been sold was returned to the original owners, and so that no clan or tribe could be deprived of their inheritance. But Solomon was starting to behave like his Egyptian father-in-law, who had wiped out the population of an entire Canaanite city and gave the city to his daughter as a wedding gift. But Hiram didn't like the cities that Solomon gave him. After looking them over, he called them Kabul, which sounds like a Hebrew word that means good for nothing. They were good for nothing towns. I've been to towns like that. He didn't think the collateral was worth the investment he had made. However, the story seems to have had a happy ending. Solomon must have paid back the loan because Hiram returned the cities to him, and Solomon rebuilt them for the Israelites, and we're going to see that eventually in 2 Chronicles chapter 8. All right, verse 20. All the people left from the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These people were not Israelites, that is, their descendants remaining in the land, whom the Israelites could not exterminate. These Solomon conscripted for his slave labor force, as it is to this day. But Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men, his government officers, his his officers, his captains, and his commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also the chief officials in charge of Solomon's projects, 550 officials supervising the men who did the work. After Pharaoh's daughter had come up from the city of David to the palace Solomon had built for her, he constructed the supporting terraces. 3 times a year, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he had built for the Lord, burning incense before the Lord along with them, and so fulfilled the temple obligations. King Solomon also built ships at Ezion, Geber, which is near Elath in Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea. And Hiram sent his men, sailors who knew the sea, to serve in the fleet with Solomon's men. They sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. And I'll share with you amounts here in just a minute. Solomon was a great entrepreneur. He made trade agreements with many nations, built a navy, and hired Hiram's expert sailors to manage it for him. Being an inland people, for the most part, the Jews were not given to maritime pursuits. In fact, throughout the Bible, we really don't see that. Most of the time, in fact, the only times I can really think of that we hear them out on water is with the disciples of Jesus, Peter and the sons of Zebedee. And then, of course, Paul in his famous shipwreck that he had on the Mediterranean Sea, but those were not Jewish ships. They were not a seafaring people any more than Azle is a seafaring group. So think of it that way. They were what you would call inland people. But Solomon had ships anyway, but he didn't know how to work them, and so that he had to have Hiram's men come and show his men how to do it. All right, where was I? Well, I'm reading this commentary. I want you to know this. This outreach, that is this connection between these Jews, those who were working for Solomon, and those who were working for Hiram, which were Gentiles, was an opportunity. In fact, for all these nations that were so impressed with Solomon, it was an opportunity to share the good news about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But we don't ever see that. We don't see Solomon ever evangelizing the world. When he alone, unlike anybody before him or after him, until the birth of Christ, nobody had an opportunity like Solomon to bring nations, entire nations, into the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he just doesn't do it. This outreach surely gave opportunities for the Jews to bear witness of their God to the pagan Gentiles, but there's no record that there was ever such a ministry. Solomon had to maintain a huge budget, and he needed as much money as he could get. On one trip that we shared with you, or we just read, they brought back 420 talents of gold, which is about 16 tons of gold. 16 tons of gold. Again, where's the gold? I want to know where the gold is. The ships also brought luxury items like ivory, apes, and peacocks. It appears that Solomon had a zoo. And so we're going to see that in a minute. I don't think it mentions the apes yet. So we'll get to this in chapter 10. Any comments or questions about chapter 9 before we get to chapter 10? Yes. Well, it had to have been multiple boats. I mean, I'm not a boat guy, but it makes me want to go scuba diving on the Med and just to see if I can find something. Yeah. Did somebody else have a hand up? Yes, Wendy. Oh, was there? No, I didn't. You have to read that on your own time. As the song says, there's no turning back. All right, chapter 10, verse 1. I like chapter 10. It's a fascinating chapter. When the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relation to the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. Unfortunately, if you look at me just for a minute, it doesn't tell us what the questions are. I would like a list of the questions. Wouldn't that be interesting? All we know is she came to test him, which is audacious in and of itself, with hard questions. Verse 2, arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan, with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, like he doesn't have enough, and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all of her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants and their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. So a queen, a famous queen, comes to see him, and she is so bedazzled, she is overwhelmed. Verse 6, she said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw them with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your men must be! How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." This is coming from a pagan. You see, I don't think it would have taken Solomon maybe a couple of sentences to convert her. But we have no record that ever happened. When the queen said, "Blessed be the Lord your God," she wasn't necessarily affirming her personal faith in Jehovah. People in those days believed in territorial deities. Each nation had its own god or gods, and when you left your land, you left your gods behind. Once she returned home, the queen would worship the gods of her own land, even though she had seen the glories of the God of Israel and heard of his wisdom. Jesus didn't commend the Queen of Sheba for her faith, but for the fact that she made every effort to travel about 1,500 miles to hear the wisdom of Solomon when the Son of God, one greater than Solomon, was in the midst of the Jewish people. And if you would, can I have you do this? Turn to Matthew chapter 12, verse 39. Matthew chapter 12, verse 39. Let's see, Matthew 12:39. Well, let's start in verse 38. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." Now, this would be getting into a different lesson, just a little context there. That's all he's been doing. I mean, how many people does he have to resurrect from the dead? How many lame has to walk, or how many blind people have to see? And so in the midst of all of these healings and all these miracles, they come to him and say, "Can you give us a sign?" So verse 39, he answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." Now, of course, the sign of the prophet Jonah is what? Yeah, Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, and then he was resurrected. He was spat out, which symbolizes the death, burial, and resurrection on the third day of Jesus Christ. And so he's prophesying his own death and resurrection here. So I'll give him no sign except for the sign of Jonah. Verse 44, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here. Now listen to this part. The queen of the south, which is the queen of Sheba, will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here. So however bad or pagan she was, she's going to end up judging this generation, he says, because they're even more pagan. And at least she sought out Solomon and his wisdom. So it's interesting that Jesus himself mentions the Queen of Sheba. All right, back to our passage for the day. Verse 10. So she's overwhelmed, she's impressed. Verse 10, and she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices, and precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought in as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. That's a lot of spices. So Sheba was a wealthy and highly civilized nation located in southwest Arabia, and the queen brought with her expensive gifts that served as samples of what her country had to offer. She told him all of her heart, it says, and he told her what she wanted to know. What she heard and what she saw left her breathless. She had heard the reports, but she didn't really believe them until she saw it all for herself. We're reminded of the experience of doubting Thomas after the resurrection of Christ. In John chapter 20, he says, "Until I see his wounds, I will not believe." Well, she was skeptical until she saw Solomon. The record of her visit gives us an opportunity to get a glimpse of life in the palace. The queen not only marveled at Solomon's palace, but she was impressed by the meals, it says. Did you notice that? Now, we're Baptists, so we would have been impressed by the meals too. She liked those meals. She still has never had Tex-Mex. And the conduct of the servants, the seating of the officers and guests, and the incredible wealth that was displayed on and around the tables. She walked with Solomon on his private concourse to the temple where she watched him worship. The wisdom of Solomon's word and the wealth of Solomon's kingdom were just too much for her, and she was no pauper herself. She was herself extraordinarily wealthy, and even she was impressed. So she brought him expensive gifts, including an abundance of spices and 120 talents of gold, that is 4.5 tons. Now, I don't know what you got for Christmas, but 4.5 tons of gold would be nice, wouldn't that? Just a little gift with the spices. I think I'd just toss out the spices and go straight for the gold, but that's really something. Solomon reciprocated by giving her whatever she asked for out of his royal bounty. The queen couldn't contain herself. She announced publicly that Solomon and his servants had to be the happiest people on earth. Yet it was Solomon who later wrote in the book of Ecclesiastes and declared, "Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless." Verse 11. Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of amugwood and precious stones. Now, I'm not familiar with amugwood. Does your translation say anything different? Yeah, A-L-M-U-G, amugwood. Yeah, and precious stones. The king used the amugwood, we'll say oak, to make supports for the temple of the Lord and for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much amugwood has never been imported or seen since that day. Thank goodness. Verse 13, King Solomon gave the queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 660 talents, not including his revenues from merchants and traders and from all the Arabian kings and the governors of the land. So he received in those taxes and collections far, far more than what she gave him. Every year he got that. King Solomon, verse 16, made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 becas of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 small shields of hammered gold with 3 minas of gold in each shield. The king put them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. That's his personal palace. It was called the Palace of the Forest of Lebanon because of all the wood. So how many shields did he make in all? So he had 200 big gold shields and 300 little gold shields. That's 500 gold shields in his palace. In other words, he has plastered the wall with golden shields. Verse 18, then the king made a great throne, inlaid with ivory and overlaid with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps, and its back had a rounded top. On both sides of the seat were armrests, with a lion standing beside each of them. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, one at either end of each step. Nothing like it had ever been made for any other kingdom. Do we have that picture? All right, there we go. That's not an actual photo, but it does. So it mentions that the top of his throne was round. Why they chose to give that detail, I don't know. It mentions the 6 steps and it mentions the 12 lions there. And so it must have been quite a spectacle. I don't know if this is the Queen of Sheba right here. It may very well be in this painting. But yeah, there you go. Okay. Verse 21. All King Solomon's goblets were gold, of course, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. The king had a fleet of trading ships at sea, along with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years, it returned carrying gold, silver, and ivory, and apes and baboons. Now, this very verse is mentioned again in 2 Chronicles, and we'll eventually get to that, but it's the same description from the same perspective, or about the same event. Having said that, other than there, this is the only place in the Bible that mentions apes or baboons. A little fun fact there. Verse 23. King Solomon is greater in rich. But now, what did he do with his baboon? Do you know what he did with his baboons and his apes? All right, we'll get to that in a second. I was going to say he created the first politicians. That's terrible. Sorry. Verse 23, King Solomon is greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift, articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons, and spices, and horses and mules. So when God promised to give Solomon wisdom, he also promised him riches and honor. Remember? Because he chose wisely. God says, I'm going to give you riches as well, and he sure did. By the way, we can take from this that it isn't a sin to possess wealth or to inherit wealth. Abraham was a very wealthy man who gave all of his wealth to his son Isaac. Earning money honestly is not a sin, but loving money and living just to acquire money is a sin. Solomon himself wrote, "Whoever loves money," this is from Ecclesiastes 5:10. This is Solomon speaking, with all the money that he has. "Whoever loves money never has money enough." Is that not true? Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. Someone has wisely said, "It's good to have the things that money can buy, provided you don't lose the things that money can't buy." Solomon's annual income was 666 talents of gold, or about 25 tons. His annual income was 25 tons of gold every single year. Well, that's better than Publishers Clearinghouse. That's 25 tons of gold a year. I'd hate to pay taxes on that. It came from several sources. It came from taxes, tolls, customs, duties, and fees. Came from trade, came from tribute from vassal rulers, and it came as gifts. All right, verse 26. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots that he never used, of course, and 12,000 horses. 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore, fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Kue. The royal merchants purchased them from Kue, if I'm saying that right, Kue or Q. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, so they did have silver there, and a horse for 150. They also exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and of the Arameans. It's interesting that they bought a chariot from Egypt. To the world of that day, and especially to the Jewish people, Solomon became a model of wealth and splendor, and no doubt many, if not most, envied him. But Jesus said that one of the Father's lilies was more beautifully arrayed than Solomon in all of his glory. That was in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6. Just one flower is more magnificent than Solomon in all of his glory. True beauty comes from within, from the hidden person of the heart. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 4. The more we must add to our possessions before people will admire us, the less true wealth and beauty we really have. David had prophets and priests who advised him and even warned and rebuked him, but nobody seems to have admonished Solomon to pay more attention to making a life instead of amassing a fortune. A Roman proverb says, "Riches are like salt water. The more you drink, the more you thirst." And, as magnificent as we're seeing Solomon in his glory right now, all you have to do is turn over to Ecclesiastes and read that. And you'll see what all of this wealth and abundance brought him. Nothing but misery and a feeling that life was meaningless. Okay, any questions or comments about our study for the week? Okay, all right. Yes.
Where was all this gold being mined? Where did all of the gold come from?
I don't know, but I have gold questions too. I don't know. Where did it come from and where did it go? I mean, this is an amount of gold that I don't know the answer to that question. Because I know that Nebuchadnezzar came and took what was still there to Babylon. So where did it go from there? And I don't know the answer to that question. It's a good question. Where did it come from and where did it go? I'm more interested in where it went than where it came from. But it's a good question. It's a lot of gold. Yes. Yeah, from all over. Yeah, from all over, absolutely. All right, let's take a look at our prayer sheet for the week.